He was in a black diving suit. The sun was rising from behind the mountain. It was still dark in front of the cave he was about to descend into. He dived into the cold underground water and followed the light which glowed deep in the heart of the earth. A red rope was slowly unwinding behind him as he was disappearing into the cave labyrinth. They've already dived here, but the time has come to try and find a new passage, a crevice opening into still undiscovered underground worlds. It was cold deep underneath the earth, in the invisible world, as in dreams. He floated above the dark landscape, slowly waving his hands like a bird. Each wave stirred up slime or silt from the walls of the narrow siphon. It was rising like dust in the deserted cathedral and foaming under his strokes. With his eyes shut, he could still feel long, sharp jets of light caressing the black hallways. He felt, or perhaps he only imagined, his eye floating somewhere beside him, observing the shadow kingdom into which he was descending. The air bubbles from his lungs were growing smaller and smaller, sticking together like quicksilver pearls and slowly rising toward the surface. He knew he was still skillful enough to fly in his dreams, which he'd experienced often enough, so he tried to surrender completely to the feeling. He was waving his hands, drawn by the current, stirring up the slime which was mixing and silently collapsing into itself. He could feel this odd perseverance of his body, craving for coldness and immobility. When I reach the end of the siphon, I shall open my eyes and look towards the light glowing at the far end, in front of the door into this mysterious world, he thought, observing his sinking body. Suddenly he felt a smarting pain in his chest, as if a fire had broken out. The eye beside him, with which he observed himself, went out, stayed behind in the dark. He was seized by fear and terrible anguish. I could fall asleep now, the comfortable thought crossed his mind, even though from somewhere afar in his drowsy mind a voice whispered to him that he shouldn't. The red thread he swam along, following the diver in front of him, was losing itself in the dark. He clung to the tiny rope as to the last hope and tied a knot. It was a sign, the only thing that could save them. They were sliding deeper and deeper into the siphon, as if immersing into a secret dwelling at the center of the earth. His heart was pounding with expectation or with overwhelming fear. They'd been down there for quite a while, definitely much longer than planned. They knew they should have found that miraculous passage by then, connecting these mighty underground worlds, and swum through towards the exit, or turned at once and backed up along the siphon. Their electronic watches were beeping, which meant their oxygen level was critical. Something must have gone wrong. The light beam of one of them was cutting across narrow, dark walls. The head, with a torch attached to it, was shifting in panic. Strong underworld current which gushed unexpectedly into the siphon, as if the earth was about to float them up, pushing and kicking the sinking bodies. Again and again an invisible hand thrust them against the sharp rocks. They strayed into the bubbling waves of rising water. Underwater windows and rock cathedrals underneath were seething with air bubbles. Rocks sharp as knives pierced neoprene. They felt the water crawl under their skin and slowly cool down their limbs. He knew he was losing his bearings, straying into the underworld labyrinths. I must have dropped the thread somewhere which knows its way through these passages, he thought. Perhaps it snapped, it struck him suddenly. Despite the dizziness, he still resisted the strong current to avoid hitting the walls, snatching at light that was pulling him within. Something overwhelming was rising in him, infinitely surpassing him. Invisible fingers slowly reached for his eyes. He knew there was nothing in front of his oxygen mask that would blind him, but there was this soothing hand lying deep within him. I'm running out of air, he thought. It was like a recognition, a revelation of a great mystery, which was perhaps the only thing he'd actually been searching for. Suddenly he turned, looking for his friend. Air, it struck him again. I need air. He swam on. Just a little longer, he encouraged himself, suddenly seeing the diving tank resting on his friend's back. It's full of air, life, he thought. I'll grab it and tear the tube from his mouth and inhale deeply, just once, then I'll be better, he was determined. The fear he'd been trying to overcome with the strength of his fit body slowly receded. The coolness of the water was becoming more and more pleasant. Despite the gushing current and cliffs he hit against again and again, tearing his skin so that he could feel the warm blood oozing down his throat, he could no longer feel anything outside. Even the unbearable, smarting pain in his chest was slowly dying away. Suddenly he felt quite calm, with only a jet of white light in front of his eyes, slowly lifting him up. At that moment, before he would have reached his friend's tube and torn it from his mouth, stolen his oxygen, life, his hand froze, as if his conscience had stopped him, or perhaps reason, and he knew, if I grab his tube now, he'll die. He pulled back as if falling helplessly into the abyss. He fell off the clouds into the almighty sea of pure light. He gazed at the dazzling and frozen landscape, his gaze floating across freely. The sky glowed with a luxuriant wrinkled curtain of violet dust, incessantly collapsing into itself, with icy clouds breaking and crumbling down below. An infinite coldness was glowing all around, which he was slowly entering. Then the noise in his ears slowly died away. His deep gulping for air and sipping was over too. Deep behind the invisible wall, he saw his friend's shadow. Suddenly the rope twisted around his body, pulled tight. He felt the knot loosening. Barely conscious, he grabbed at the end of the rope and pulled himself up, towards the exit, lighting up with the sun.